This is from Amarino999. Paul, I just finished your book. Loved it. Been following you for a few years now and finally got around to reading it. When is volume 2 coming out? Also, my husband had a question. If Nephilim hybridized themselves with animals, are there any archaeological evidence of this? Or would it have been destroyed in the flood? Or was it potentially destroyed during Christ's return around the 1st century? Well, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the book. Thanks for reading it. And volume 2, like I said, hopefully will be released in September this year. That's my target right now. I think it's a reasonable one given the amount of work I know I have to do. I couldn't give you a date, but September's my main target. So that should be it. We're on track for that. As for your question, if Nephilim hybridize themselves with animals. So first of all, I don't think there's evidence biblically that's exactly how it went down. I don't think Nephilim themselves hybridized themselves with animals. I think a lot of genetic engineering went on after the Nephilim that caused animal chimera hybrids to suddenly come around. I think the first genetic experiment was creating Nephilim, which is angel mixing themselves with human DNA and creating this abomination, giant offspring that look like psychedelic, reptilian, animalistic clown human monsters. And they became a nightmare to contend with and were eating everything and everybody. And they were sinning against everything by eating it, basically, and tearing up the land. And then I think once they were all dead, because of the punishment, the Watchers had to watch their children kill each other, which would have been the Nephilim. And once the Watchers were bound in chains, I think there were some left that were in rebellion against God, along with Satan's rebellion, who looked at the situation and said, okay, well, I don't think we can mate with human women again, because we've seen what happened to the guys who did that. And I don't want to suffer that consequence, all right? That punishment is too much to bear. So instead of having sex with human women to corrupt God's creation, why don't we teach humans how to do it themselves, how to corrupt God's creation themselves? And I think that's where the method of genetic splicing and engineering was given to mankind. And that's where we get chimeras and cryptids being created, like lizard people, centaurs, mermaids, bird people, all this type of thing. You know, there's variations, ant people, bug people, like pick a type of animal, like a species, reptile, avian, mammal, whatever it is. And mix it with a human or fish, you know what I mean? And then you get these crazy hybrid cryptid monsters we have today. And these were humans doing it to themselves, perhaps maybe being given technology or methods taught by angels, but I don't think these angels did anything. I think they gave mankind the method, but it was man who chose to implement it. And I think that was to like legalistically get around the punishment for what they were doing. But I don't think they pulled the wood over God's eyes, and I'm sure they'll get exactly what's theirs if they haven't already. And I think, yeah, the cryptids did exist then. And I think when the flood came, a lot of them died, but a lot of them didn't. And a lot of them survived the flood because they were now not humans anymore. They were animals. Monsters in a sense. And they weren't on the surface of the earth. And now only everything on the surface of the earth was killed. So the bird people flew up into the sky and receded on top of the waters and floated on top of the water as birds can do because their bones are hollow until it was all over. And I think a lot of them went underground, went subterranean. I think the reptilian people went subterranean and became hibernators. And I think the reptilian people, being cold-blooded, could survive underground quite easily. And I think people who may have hybridized themselves with certain mammals could hibernate for long periods of time underground and wait out the flood or not die. And I think a lot of people who genetically engineered themselves survived the flood due to their new genetic nature. But they weren't human anymore. They'd become something else, and then they would breed and spread and become other things. And I think post-flood, we saw examples of brush-ins with these creatures, like the lion men of Moab, for example, or the cynocephali, which were the dog-headed men. And obviously we have reports of things like the blemmies, these chest-headed people, where the face is in the chest and they've got no head. There's lots of examples of odd-shaped creatures and men all throughout human history in the modern age. People were fighting chimeraed animals and hybrid dragons in England through the medieval period. If you look at some of the artwork, you probably believe they were telling you the truth about what these people were contending with and what they were seeing. And I think they've been a menace since that pre-flood genetic manipulation that went on. And I do think all evidence for them, to the latter part of your husband's question, was not necessarily destroyed by the flood, but is just buried. And a lot of it that is uncovered is destroyed by the Smithsonian. There's a huge cover-up to rewrite history and to destroy any evidence of such things. If you read the Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus, a first century Roman Jewish historian, he's talking about how a tribe defeated these giants, and you can see the bones of the giants on display even to this day in his time in the first century. And he's like, the shape of these things, unlike any man. It's completely insane to behold. They just look like something else, something completely just beyond comprehension, you know. And they're on display. Now, we don't have those types of bones on display today because they're all destroyed because they don't fit the evolutionary narrative. And I think this in the late 19th century, early 20th century, in fact, all through the 19th century, to be honest, all through the 1800s and 1900s, I think a lot of this stuff was buried and hidden and removed. And while it was being dug up, just as quickly as it was dug up, it was taken away. As soon as the local newspaper did a tale on it, the government turned up and took those things away and destroyed them or archived them for study or safekeeping, but never to be seen again. And there's lots of examples of that. Some people have done some great work on this, and I talk about it in the first book, where they are talking about all the giant skeletons that have been found all over America, for example. And they know they found them because there's loads of newspaper articles for each individual place where a very reputable archaeologist is talking about what they've found. So these aren't quacks or crazy people who aren't known, or just someone in the backyard has found something. These are like archaeologists, well known and respected in their fields, digging up giants' bones and talking to the newspapers about what they've found. And all we have are the articles, but we don't have any evidence of the things they uncovered, because the Smithsonian always turned up and took away the stuff. And obviously these archaeologists trust the system and let it happen without any question and assume the best, you know. But there was a eugenics takeover of that institution in the early 1900s, which demanded that all this talk of giants stop. And that's what they did. They made it stop. All evidence that any such thing ever existed, probably including monsters and cryptids, is gone. And I think a lot of what we call dinosaur skeletons today are some of these hybridized creatures, some of the animals that were turned into monsters basically through this process. But also I think a lot of dinosaur bones are bullshit as well. I think a lot of what they presented in the early days especially were just made up, and they found these bones of giants and said this belongs to a giant lizard when it really belonged to a giant man. And a lot of it's reconstructed from assumption. But if you look into what these things really did look like, they might not have been giant lizards, they might have been giant bird reptile creatures. And then when you get into it, dragons. Realistically, you're just dealing with dragons here. There's always this funny meme I've found where it shows a rendition of the evolution of what they think dinosaurs looked like. Okay, and at the end, they've come to this feathered chicken dragon monster. Okay, and they have this, the way they've drawn it with its wings up. And then it shows how the medieval people drew dragons, and it's identical. It's like the medieval people knew exactly what these things looked like because they were still killing them and fighting them and subduing them and keeping them as pets and all sorts of things. You know? And modern science finally caught up eventually. It just makes me laugh. But I hope that answers the question. That's my workaround to what you just said. That's what I understand and how I lay it out. If there is evidence, it's gone. But what we do have is residual evidence through the newspaper articles that talk about what they found.